Hello, I'm Michael Hyman, a professor with the Environmental Studies program at Dickinson College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. I'll be your guide today as we explore a remarkable and powerful new source of information, a database now available to community residents to learn more about the environmental health of their neighborhoods. Congress specifically intended the Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act of 1986, otherwise known as EPCRA, to enable us to learn more about the hazardous chemical substances that are stored, emitted, and handled in our communities. The Community Right to Know section of this Act sets up the Toxic Release Inventory, or TRI database, whereby major chemical handlers must report on the substances that they store and release into the community. Before we move on to explore this database and how to access it, some background information might be useful. For the past decade, I've been active as a participant in and an advisor to the grassroots movement for environmental justice. This is an effort by community residents to gain some control over the many attempts now underway to site hazardous, solid, and nuclear waste repositories in their communities. These communities are often low-income, working-class communities and frequently communities of color. The goal here is to move away from regulated release of chemicals into the community towards upfront pollution prevention. Community residents are also concerned about routine release of chemicals from abandoned hazardous waste sites, as well as release from ongoing industrial processes. The Environmental Studies program at Dickinson College is the principal sponsor of this video. We here at Dickinson College are committed to this goal of grassroots community empowerment. This is demonstrated through our Community Toxic Waste Audit Program. Employing students working together with faculty, we work with communities across the country, enabling them to access this important toxic waste inventory that I'll be referring to today. The audit program on campus is initiated each year as 75 students in our introductory environmental science class prepare toxic waste audits on communities or facilities of their choosing. As a result, we now run one of the largest campus-based waste audit programs drawn from the TRI database, and our actions have attracted regional as well as national attention. As an educator, it's been my experience that community residents, often with no more formal education than a high school diploma, learn more in a shorter period of time than almost any other population. Often within a few months, community residents can gain the requisite knowledge and information necessary to take a stand at a formal public hearing and hold their own when faced with the testimony provided by so-called experts employed by industry and affected public agencies. Armed with the information covered in this video, you too can help mobilize support among your neighbors to move towards a goal of toxic use reduction. Now, toxic use reduction is a goal that moves well beyond the regulated release of chemical substances into our environment. It acknowledges that we have to lower the amount of chemicals which workers as well as community residents are exposed to in all phases of the production process. Perhaps not surprising, most of the industries that are required to report under the Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act also support this goal of toxic use reduction. Toxic use reduction will help to lower the liability that a company may face in the case of mismanagement of its chemical wastes, and will also lower the eventual waste management bill should the waste be shipped off-site for handling or treatment. Moreover, toxic use reduction helps to recycle former waste streams into useful production inputs, as it ultimately moves us toward the goal of less use of expensive toxic chemicals as an input into the production process. Now I'd like to turn to a workshop that I typically conduct before community activist groups. Our story actually begins in 1984 in the city of Bhopal, India. Here, a subsidiary of Union Carbide, a major multinational chemical company, had an accidental release of methyl isocyanate, a deadly chemical that is used to make pesticides. Tens of thousands of residents in Bhopal were severely affected, with several thousand dying outright and many more scarred for life. As the EPA and Congress were to find out, we already had similar releases of hazardous chemicals in the amounts that were released in Bhopal, India, right here at home prior to the Bhopal release, including releases of methyl isocyanate. Fortunately, here in the United States, the spills were not accompanied by the massive loss of life we found in India. This was partially due to better planning and zoning here, and also basic good luck. At a minimum, unlike Bhopal, we didn't have people living right up against the company gates. Nevertheless, the Bhopal shock was felt here as well. Congress soon discovered that up to that point, there wasn't really any routine way that emergency response personnel, those are your fire departments, your police departments, and your emergency hospital response teams, could find out what dangerous substances were stored at a factory site and might be released into the environment in the event of an accident. In brief, the old method of trying to track down a plant manager or engineer who might have the relevant information about what was burning on a site or exploding at a site just was deemed to be, at that point, insufficient. So in 1986, Congress responded with the Superfund Amendments and Reauthorization Act, otherwise known as SARA. In addition to providing more funding for the Superfund program, SARA set up a system whereby emergency response personnel could have now advanced information on the hazardous chemicals stored at an industrial site. Here, Congress specifically intended the community, that means you and I, to also have some information about these chemicals and their routine release into the environment. This section of the Act, known as SARA Title III, actually is the EPCRA Act that we're talking about today. That's the Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act. It sets up the Toxic Release Inventory database that we will be looking at in this video. The significance of EPCRA and its TRI database cannot be overstated. For the first time, the company factory gate has been opened up for public inspection. We now can get, in a figurative sense, behind the company gate to see what chemicals are stored there. Now, EPCRA and SARA Title III, or Community Right to Know Act, is only a reporting act. I want to make that very clear. It's not a regulatory act. It doesn't regulate the release of any specific chemical into the environment. Rather, it requires the companies to report on what chemicals are stored on site and what are released into the environment. Nevertheless, knowledge is power, and public information provided through EPCRA has led to citizens demanding that our regulatory acts, our existing regulatory acts, are strengthened. Let's take a look at the Clean Air Act, for example. Up to the 1990 amendments, the Clean Air Act, which was originally passed in 1970, only regulated the release of 6 bulk pollutants and about a half dozen more other chemicals on a case-by-case basis, about a dozen chemicals in all. Thanks to the information provided to environmental groups and to the public through EPCRA, Congress strengthened the Clean Air Act in 1990 to add approximately 170 more chemicals to the lists of those that were regulated. Most of these chemicals came off the EPCRA list. The Clean Water Act, which regulated about 6 bulk pollutants up to that point, was also strengthened with the addition of dozens of more chemicals coming off the EPCRA list. Beyond strengthening our regulatory, providing information to strengthen our regulatory process, the information provided through EPCRA also strengthens local labor environmental coalitions, because it's the workers themselves who are exposed to the highest levels of chemicals in most instances. And the information provided through the Toxic Release Inventory, the EPCRA database, if you will, is information that backs up worker right to know information provided for under the Occupational Safety and Health Act. This has led to coalitions of workers and environmental activists working together to move us towards toxic use reduction, not just in the factory, but not just in the community, but in both places where the chemicals are released. EPCRA also has strengthened local planning and zoning, for the information provided enables local planning and zoning commissions to better plan for the location of facilities that routinely handle hazardous chemicals. Another important point is that the Toxic Release Inventory, EPCRA, is a cross-media piece of legislation. Up to this point, environmental regulation and environmental consideration was on a media-by-media basis. We had regulations for release of chemicals into the air, or into the water, or disposal of chemicals in the land or in the ocean and so forth. EPCRA is a major piece of legislation that tracks a chemical wherever it may end up, whether it's in the air or in deep well injection in a sewer plant or released into a river or a lake. In that sense, it avoids what's known as the toxic shell game. No longer can companies claim that they're cleaning up the environment in air release, for example, and then turn around and release the chemical without much public information into a waterway or send off to an off-site landfill. So EPCRA helps to provide information across all the media that are impacted by environmental release. In addition, the EPCRA database supports a national campaign for reduction of pollution into our environment, and beyond that, for zero discharge of toxic and hazardous materials into our environment. This is a goal that was first envisioned by the 1972 Clean Water Act, and by 1985 we were supposed to have zero emission of toxic chemicals into our waterways. EPCRA provides information that helps move us towards this goal of zero release of toxic chemicals and hazardous chemicals into our environment by, again, providing information about the environmental fate of these chemicals. I want to point out again that most major chemical plants such as Dow, run by Dow, DuPont, or Monsanto, or 3M Corporation, are indeed also committed to the goal of toxic use reduction. The majority of the larger chemical plants have already committed themselves in word, if not in deed, to reductions of 50% or more in the toxic release inventory chemicals, TRI chemicals, that they release to the environment. And progress has been quite significant on many fronts. This is a goal that we can all applaud. Before we go ahead and look at the data, you must be aware of the reporting thresholds under this act. EPCRA mandates that industry report on the amount of specific hazardous chemicals stored on site and the quantities released into various medium. These media include point, that means coming out of a smokestack, and non-point, or fugitive air emissions, water discharges with the name of the receiving body of water specified, releases to publicly owned treatment works, or POTWs, basically a fancy name for sewage plants, off-site shipment to a landfill or incinerator, again specifying the name and address of the receiving firm, deep well injection, and so forth. In addition, the reporting firms must specify the manner whereby the waste material was handled, either on-site or at off-site waste management facilities. Federal reporting is limited at present to the following thresholds. First, reporting is only required on approximately 325 chemicals out of thousands in commercial production. At present, there are approximately 70,000 chemicals in commercial production, and perhaps 10% of these, or 7,000, are human or environmental health hazards. Indeed, any chemical, even oxygen or water or common table salt, in high enough concentration could kill you. Well, of the 7,000 serious suspected human health hazards, only a small sample of approximately 325 chemicals are on the list. The numbers change yearly as the EPA, through a petition process, adds and deletes chemicals according to industry and environmental pressure. For the most part, the chemicals on the list are those that the EPA determines to pose the greatest health and/or environmental threat, including human carcinogens, chemicals that are teratogenic or capable of causing birth defects, mutagens that cause cell mutations, chemicals that are nerve toxins or cause immune and endocrine failure, and so forth. On the environmental side, wide spectrum and pervasive toxins that bioaccumulate or are affiliated with global environmental change, such as with chlorofluorocarbons, which have been implicated in ozone depletion, may also be on the reporting list. Second, EPCA only applies to manufacturing plants in SIC codes 20 through 39. SIC stands for Standard Industrial Code. Medical, university research, power generation, and federal facilities, as well as many others, are currently exempt. That's right. Only private manufacturing establishments are required to present information. When you consider that the federal government itself, through the Department of Defense or the Department of Energy, and state agencies and research universities and energy plants and waste management firms also handle thousands of tons of hazardous materials, you quickly realize that we are really only getting information here from a small, albeit significant, sector of the chemical handlers. The reporting firms fall into the 4-digit standard industrial codes ranging from 2011 for meat packing plants to 3995 for manufacturers of burial caskets. Now that's quite a range. I wonder if there's a connection. According to a recently signed executive order, federal facilities will soon be reporting as well, and we can expect federal data to come in for the 1995 reporting year. Third, industry facilities only have to report if they have 10 or more full-time equivalent employees on site. Congress decided that firms with less than 10 employees could not afford the labor power required to fill out these forms. Now, this may exempt many small mom-and-pop chemical plants, or more precisely, dry cleaning establishments, metal plating facilities, and the like. Nevertheless, the really big boys, namely the major chemical, pharmaceutical, auto, and metal production plants, are usually covered. Fourth, facilities only have to report if they actually manufacture or process 25,000 pounds or more of a listed chemical over the course of the reporting year, or if they use 10,000 pounds or more, that's 5 tons, of the chemical in the manufacturing process. Here we see that the Act, drawn from emergency response concerns, is clearly driven by what is on site, not by what is released into the environment. You may, for example, come across a very responsible chemical plant that handles hundreds of thousands of pounds of a listed chemical over the course of a year and only releases a few pounds. It has to report, while the smaller mom-and-pop plant with 9,000 pounds in production that's sloppy and loses half of this to the environment does not have to report. Fifth, there is an annual reporting cycle for the database, and this misses peak discharge. We see a situation here where a plant may report a major emission of, let's say, 100,000 pounds of an acute toxin into the environment. Whether this occurs all at once, when there is a thermal inversion over the valley and lots of people in the streets, and let's hope this isn't the situation, or gradually over the course of a year, would make a world of difference to the exposed public. Unfortunately, this database does not differentiate between peak release and gradual release. All release is cumulative for the reporting year. Sixth, industry fills out the forms itself, and who's checking for honesty? This is always a problem, as the EPA and state personnel have very limited means to find out just how honest the reporting firm is. To be sure, the bigger firms with lots of public visibility usually strive for full reporting. The fine for willful misrepresentation can range to $25,000 per day, and these firms could ill afford the negative publicity. In practice, however, there are many ways facilities can make a mistake filling out the forms, and plant personnel have several years after first filing the data to correct honest mistakes as they become known. For this reason, should you require such precision for legal or media work, I urge you to consult only the most current form of the data you are interested in, as available on file at your state reporting center. When it comes to honesty in reporting, we have a pressing need here to keep in touch with labor at the plants. Not only are the workers the ones who are at greatest risk from routine and accidental chemical exposure, but they are also more likely to spot willful misrepresentation and even non-reporting. Already unions such as the Oil, Chemical, and Atomic Workers Union and the United Steelworkers of America are learning about this database and are uniting with environmental groups to push for such legislation as worker right to know and right to act laws, whistleblower protection, and toxic use reduction provisions. These measures aim at toxic use and release reduction, not only into the local community, but on the factory floor itself. At the Sun Oil Refinery in Philadelphia, which we are going to look at in a few minutes, community groups are pushing for a good neighbor program to further toxic use reduction while allowing for routine worker and community inspection of the plant. The alliance formed for such includes representatives from the plant's union, local residents nearby the refinery, and environmental advocates such as Clean Water Action and the Delaware Valley Toxics Coalition. We should recognize that unions are essential not only to protect worker interests in the plant, but as a front line of defense for the rest of us who are too often asked to accept industry's reporting as an act of faith. In general, we find far fewer reporting problems with unionized plants where workers have a right to know and a right to act. As environmental and community activists, I urge you to break bread with your local unions and work together toward a production process that is economically efficient, environmentally sustainable, and also protects worker rights to a decent and secure living wage. Seventh, reporting firms can still claim trade secret protection, thus limiting the amount of information available to the public. Subject to specific reporting provisions, a firm may claim trade secret protection for the actual identity of a toxic chemical that it is using, or the amount of that chemical on site. This is granted by the EPA because such information may severely limit a firm's competitiveness if another firm acquires that information. Should the claim be upheld, the firm then submits two versions of the Form R. One that is unsanitized and only available to proper authorities, and then a sanitized version made available for the general public, listing just the generic identity of the chemical. Eighth, there is a serious delay with public access to the TRI database. Each year, every plant that has to report subject to the aforementioned thresholds fills out what is known as a Form R, one Form R per listed chemical per plant site. For example, each and every DuPont plant among the dozens across the nation has to fill out its own Form R for listed chemicals in reportable amounts. A few plants, such as Kodak in Rochester, New York, may file 60 Form Rs or more, while the majority of reporting plants only file 1 or 2 forms. In all, approximately 25,000 plants nationwide and in Puerto Rico and Guam file nearly 90,000 Form Rs each year. Now, the plant must send its data for the previous reporting year by July 1st to a state reporting center, usually located in the state capital. The names and addresses of these state reporting centers are listed in the EPA and Inform manuals that I will be alluding to at the end of this video. Thus, by July 1st of 1994, plants had to submit their forms, whether filed electronically or on paper, to the state center for the 1993 reporting year. From here, a copy is made of the data, and this is sent to the EPA regional headquarters, as well as to the National Reporting Center in Washington, D.C. At the National Center, the data are fed into a mainframe computer by an army of workers, and from this, the various products that we can access are produced. Unfortunately, it takes almost a year for the data to be available through the EPA. Thus, While the information is available from your state reporting center, usually in the fall following summer submission, the EPA may not have the data compiled nationally until the following spring. For example, we can look for the national 1993 data set appearing in the spring of 1995. While the State Reporting Center provides more timely data, please be aware that the state centers may charge you 5 cents or more a page to print it out, while the EPA's TRI Reporting Center will send you up to 200 pages covering some 20 to 30 formats for free by calling 202-260-3757. You can also fax your request to the TRI Reporting Center at 202-260-4655. In your request to the TRI Reporting Center, you must clearly specify by name, location, and reporting year the community or facility you are interested in. Please note that the aforementioned thresholds only refer to the reporting requirements under the Federal Right to Know Act. Many states now have, in addition, their own reporting requirements with stricter reporting thresholds covering more chemicals and at lower reporting levels. New Jersey and Massachusetts, in particular, have some of the most thorough reporting requirements available. Here, firms have to document not only the environmental fate of listed chemical wastes, but how much of the specific hazardous substance ends up in the manufactured product itself. Here, state legislation acknowledges that the product itself can contain the poison. For total worker, consumer, and community exposure to a hazardous substance, must consider how much of a listed substance goes into the product, which is eventually discarded into the environment. Be aware that you can access these more comprehensive state databases through your state reporting center. Now, let's get back to the federal reporting requirements themselves. I want to talk now about data access, how to get a hold of the Form Rs and the various formats that these forms are available in. For legal purposes, should you ever decide to go that route, I would refer you only to the actual Form R on file at the State Reporting Center as filled out by the plant itself. And moreover, you should work only with the most current updated version of that data. The EPA data system is bound to have entry mistakes, and should you access the mainframe in Washington, you may not be working with the latest current form. Nevertheless, for most of us, the computer or electronic format of the TRI database, whether retrieved from Washington or from your state reporting center, should suffice. Now, the EPA takes this massive data and once fed into a mainframe, makes it available in several formats. As I go through these formats, I will be mentioning several phone numbers for access. These numbers will be repeated once again at the end of the video. First, the data are available online for those of us with a computer and a modem for a modest fee, as well as the cost of a long-distance phone call. The data can be had by dialing into the National Library of Medicine's ToxNet system. The ToxNet system can be accessed once you have an account. To establish an account, you can call the service desk at 1-800-638-8480. Fortunately, thanks to foundation grants and some public funding, the data are also available for free through your computer modem by dialing into a mainframe or via internet, the global web of information available to many academic, government, and nonprofit organizations. Both direct mainframe access and the internet access versions of the database are available for free through the Right to Know network. The acronym is RTKNet. RTKNet is an effort maintained by the nonprofit OMB Watch and the Unison Institute, both headquartered in Washington, D.C. Both of these organizations are dedicated to citizen access to government information. RTKNet provides free online access to the TRI data and a whole lot more, including census data, company legal and compliance histories, and even water quality monitoring data for thousands of regulated industries. The network also provides bulletin boards for grassroots activists on topics ranging from environmental racism to toxic use reduction and good neighbor agreements. You can reach RTKNet and establish your free account by calling 202-234-8494. Second, as already mentioned, the EPA National Reporting Center prepares facsimiles of the Form Rs from the online mainframe format. These sheets can be mailed to you. Alternately, you can have your very own personalized search done by the EPA's Try Us, TRI, United States, Try Us librarian by calling 202-260-1531. There is no charge for this service, and should you request it, you have to specify again the facility or community that you are interested in. The Try Us librarian can also help you structure your request to avoid wasted effort and paper. Now for the good news. For those of us who are without our own computer or modem, and those who consider themselves computer illiterate, the Form Rs are available for all reporting years in one neat CD-ROM set. The CD-ROM provides by far the easiest and quickest access to the database. All you have to do is to go to your nearest Federal Depository Library and use the CD-ROM set on file there. A list of these libraries is available via the EPCRA hotline at 1-800-535-0202, or from your local county library. They also have a list of these depositories. Indeed, many non-depository libraries, such as county libraries and local academic libraries, may also have the data set, or they can at least get a copy of the CD-ROMs for free, usually to display on their in-house CD-ROM reader if they have one. Remember, at any designated federal depository, even at a private university or research library, you have the right to access the data. That is the requirement for depository designation. At Dickinson College, for example, our librarians will go out of their way to assist you should you wish to use our data set, and they can guide you through the additional reference materials we have on reserve to interpret and use the information uncovered. At present, the latest data set in CD-ROM format was released in October of 1993, and it appears on 2 discs and covers the 1987 through 1992 reporting years. Nonprofit groups dedicated to community outreach and with access to the requisite hardware may be able to receive a disc for free by contacting the EPA's Try Us librarian at 202-260-1531. You should have at least an IBM-compatible computer with 640K RAM, an MS-DOS or PC-DOS version 3.3 and higher, a hard disk drive, and a CD-ROM reader. This information will be repeated again at the end of this video. Don't worry if all this sounds like gobbledygook to you. Your local reference librarian will understand this and can let you know if the library is set up to install the disks. A manual detailing installation, the many acronyms used in the data set, and other useful access and research strategies will accompany the disk. Should you wish to access the data disk at your local depository library, this manual should also be available nearby. It came with the disks. I suggest calling ahead to see if your county library has the data set, and if not, whether they have the requisite hardware and are willing to load the disk that you or they can order from the TRI Us librarian. All right, now that you've seen the lecture and learned something about the toxic release inventory and its threshold limitations, it's time to move on to the main event and actually view the toxic release inventory in CD-ROM format. To do this requires a CD-ROM-based computer to run the program, a monitor to view the program, and a keyboard to type instructions to the program. The data disks themselves come with a small gray booklet entitled CD-ROM Quick User Guide. You'll have to refer to this booklet if you want to make any sense out of the many acronyms and terms I'll be covering in this demonstration. Okay, now let's turn to the computer and move ahead. After turning on the computer, make sure that the monitor is also turned on. After the computer is turned on, the screen will display a menu of some sort, or it will show a prompt entitled TRI, TRI1, TRI2, or something similar to that. Here we have labeled the first disk in the set, the disk entitled Chemical Releases, TRI1, and the disk entitled Waste Treatment, TRI2. If the CD-ROM is already installed, choose TRI1, Chemical Releases, from the menu, or type TRI1 to pull up the program. If not, then the reference librarian can load the program instructions, give the different options a name such as TRI1 or TRI2, and install the CD-ROM that is already sitting in the library or that you brought with you. Today we will focus on the first disk, Chemical Releases. This is the data set containing the basic 4 MARs, including facility identification information, chemical information, SIC or standard industrial codes, chemical use information, and the amount of the chemicals in pounds stored on site, released to the air or to the water and land, or transferred to POTWs, remember those are sewage treatment plants, or transferred to off-site treatment locations. The second disk, entitled Waste Treatment, contains information on waste treatment methods and their efficiency. We will not look at this disk at this time. Once you type TRI1 and hit the Enter key, you're in the program and a menu appears. The other keys you will need to use, besides Enter, also known as the return key, include the arrow keys located on the lower right-hand side of most keyboards, the function keys or F keys, which are on top of the keyboard and range from F1 to F12, and the escape key located on the upper left-hand side of the keyboard, bringing you back to the previous command or screen when you hit it. You will also use the letter and number keys to do your search. Although the database is displayed in blazing colors, you can also access the material with the monochrome monitor, as bland as that might appear. The first screen that appears once you enter the program contains a green box titled Database Selection. You have 4 choices. 1. Chemical substance fact sheets. These sheets for most of the chemicals in the database are derived from various sources, including New Jersey health and safety sheets, occupational safety and health administration regulations, material safety data sheets prepared by the producers of the various chemicals, and so forth. 2. Toxic release inventory. This is the main database on the disk. It contains all of the toxic release information for the U.S. for the years 1987 through 1992. 3. Calculated releases, or KSTAT. This is a statistical analysis program that you can use to compute, display, and save various formats of the data you download. 4. Quit TRI CD-ROM disk. When highlighted, this allows you to quit the program and return to the original screen. Highlight your selection with the arrow keys and hit Enter. Here we will choose Toxic Release Inventory for now. A title screen appears after a few seconds. Hit Enter again to bring up yet another title screen. Takes a few seconds for the computer to bring up the information that we require. Hit Enter one more time and wait for the main toxic release menu screen. We are now at the main screen. At the top of the screen are 5 different sets of pull-down menus. They can be accessed with the function keys or the arrow keys. Note that there is a help menu located on the upper left-hand side of the screen, F1. You can use it to explain the other menus on the screen and how to access them. With the arrow or F3 key, choose the Select pull-down menu. Note that there are 88 different fields whereby you can search the data set. Depending on how much information you have in advance, you can narrow down your search quickly to pull up the Form Rs you are interested in. With each of the 88 categories, you are asked to type in a name or a number, such as a zip code or an abbreviation, as with states, of the facility or community, the name of a receiving body of water, or the name of a sewage treatment plant that you are interested in. With each category, you are creating a separate set of all the Form Rs in the database that lists somewhere on that form the identifying information that you typed in. All of the categories are searched in the same basic manner. Each one, such as a state, or a county, or a city, or a specific release year, and so on, when entered, generate their own separate data set. You will later combine the sets you have created to zero in on the specific facility or geographic parameter you are concerned with. To illustrate, let's do a sample facility search of the Form Rs as filed by the Sun Refinery in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Once the Select pull-down menu is chosen, use the arrow key to highlight the term Facility State, and then press the Enter key. Now type in the two-letter postal abbreviation for the state that that facility is located in. Here, PA for Pennsylvania. Press Enter again, and the computer will create a set from the CD-ROM of all the Form Rs filed for Pennsylvania for all of the reporting years available on the data disk, here 1987 through 1992. Once a set is created, the number displayed next to the set reflects the total number of Form Rs in that set, be it for a specific state, a reporting year, a company with all of its plants, a city, and so on. Note that there are 26,807 Form Rs filed for Pennsylvania between 1987 and 1992. Scroll with the arrow keys to the reporting year and press Enter. Then highlight with your arrow key the year that you are interested in and press Enter again. Today we'll take a look at the most recent data forms available to us, those filed for the 1992 reporting year. As the computer pulls up all those Form Rs, which takes several seconds, we realize that we're creating a set for 1992 that contains all the Form Rs filed across the United States, including Puerto Rico and Guam. Here we create a set for 1992, the most recent reporting year available on this disk, and it contains 81,071 Form Rs filed. In a similar manner, scroll to Facility Name, press Enter, and type in Sun with a question mark. This enables the computer to search for any Form R with the letters SUN in the facility name. We do this because we may not know the full or exact name of the facility and whether it is called Sun Oil, or just Sun, or Sun Refining, or Sun Refinery, or whatever. Note that the major corporations can have plants under a wide variety of names, and for some searches you might best start with the parent company's name or a piece of it followed by a question mark, and then narrow your search using other parameters. For our purposes, we'll stick right now with Sun, as we still do not know the exact name of the Philadelphia facility. Note with just Sun, we have created a data set with 1,060 Form Rs filed in it. To further narrow our search, as there may be more than one Sun facility in Pennsylvania, scroll with the arrow keys to Facility City, press Enter, and type in the name of the city that you're interested in. For our purposes today, it will be Philadelphia. And press Enter. Note that a new data set's creating with 1,883 forms in it. These are the Form Rs that were filed for the city of Philadelphia for the years 1987 through 1992 for all reporting firms. Later on, we'll combine the city of Philadelphia with the term sun, the state, and the year to narrow our search for our purposes. In a similar manner, you can create separate data sets by such things as facility zip code, by the parent company name, by the name of the space here. The name of an off-site facility to which you might send your waste, or an off-site city, the name of a sewage treatment plant or a POTW, and so on. The off-site facility search is particularly interesting as these facilities do not have to report themselves, but the name comes up and we can collect the formats where they appear. This is because manufacturers that do have to report list the off-site facilities as receiving a portion of the waste generated. You may find it interesting, as some of our students have, to compare what reporting firms say they are sending to the off-site facilities and what those facilities are actually licensed to receive. This can be accomplished by looking at the various state and federal RCRA manifest forms on file with your state environmental management agency or the regional EPA office. As it is now time to combine our sets, we move over to the F5 column, Sets, using our F5 key or our arrow keys. Here the pull-down menu gives us many options to work with the sets that we have already created. For our purposes, we will use the arrow keys to highlight combined sets for now, and then we press Enter. Now we have a choice. We can choose to combine our sets with the word and, or with or with not. We choose the word and because we want to overlay Pennsylvania and 1992 and Sun and Philadelphia. After we press Enter, we type in the data set numbers. 1, enter or and, 2, and 3, and 4, and. We do a double and to shut off the search. Now we have a fifth set consisting of Sun for 1992 for Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. When asked to give it a name, we can choose any name, and we respond with Sun Philadelphia 1992. And we press Enter. We now see that there's a new combined set containing 28 formats on our screen. It is important to note that when you log off the computer, all of the sets that you have created are erased. So you have to download them first to a floppy disk or print them out to save them. It is impossible for you to permanently write to a CD-ROM disk, such as we are using here, nor can anyone read your search after you log off. Thus, the privacy of your search is protected. Under the Sets menu, use the arrow key to highlight Display a Set. Then press Enter. Note that there are many other ways we can access our set. For example, we can print any set. This requires a printer to be connected to the computer. I'd advise against doing this at the public workstation for now if you are handling a set with more than a few formats. Each format runs about 2 pages, and you could easily tie up your printer and upset other patrons of the library if you try to print out, let's say, 1,000 forms. Alternately, you can export a set to a floppy disk to review it later at your leisure. For now, let's display set number 5, Sun Philadelphia. Type 5 in for the set that you want displayed, and press Enter. Now you're asked to choose a default order. That means you're asked to choose a display order. For example, we can rank the forms in the set by alphabetically by facility name, or name of the city that the forms are located in, or the firms are located in, by facility county and state, and so on. As this set only contains forms for Sun Philadelphia, such a ranking wouldn't do much. Let's rank the forms according to total release of chemicals to the environment. When we highlight this option and press Enter, we are asked whether we want the forms in full or in brief form. I strongly suggest that you choose Releases Brief here, using your arrow key, as the full releases calls up each and every data set for all of the Form Rs in your set, regardless if the firm entered anything in them or not. This is very important because releases brief just pulls up those data cells that have an entry in them. You will not miss any of the relevant data, and you'll also be using a lot less screen space, waste a lot less paper, save trees and habitat, and you'll generally demonstrate your good environmental credentials when you print out your search using the Releases Brief option. Once we highlight Releases Brief and hit Enter, the Form Rs are arranged for us. In the display before us, we note that there are only 21 of the original 28 Form Rs present, with the first one appearing on the screen. This is because of the 28 forms filed in the Sun Philadelphia 1992 set. Not all document a release to the environment. If you are more concerned with what is stored on site or which firms handle a specific chemical, then you can choose a different display option. Note that of the 21 forms in this set, we have before us the first form that lists the least release of the chemical here to the environment. The set ends with number 21, the form documenting the greatest release to the environment. Let's jump to that record to see which TRI chemical Sun is releasing in greatest amount in Philadelphia. We could leisurely scroll through all of the 21 forms in the set using the arrow keys, one form per keystroke, but that would take too long. So let's jump ahead. To do this, we hit Enter again, and this brings us to the Action menu, where we can actually jump around the data set. Let's highlight the option Jump to Record by Number, using our arrow key once again. When we hit Enter, and then type in the number 21, and press Enter one more time, notice that Enter is our favorite key in this demonstration, the 21st form in our set appears before us. Now you can see how the U.S. environmental regulation effort runs on acronyms, long the bane of the uninitiated. We have before us an endless list of dozens of acronyms, most of which are new to us. Fortunately, the CD-ROM disks come with that nifty little gray book listing the acronyms, and you must refer to it if you want to make any sense of the form before us. To start, note that highlighted at the top, we have the specific submission number assigned to this form, followed by a TRI number assigned to the facility. Further down, we find that the form covers the 1992 reporting year, the facility is in EPA Region 3, and the facility name of this specific Sun plant is Sun Refining and Marketing Company. Further down, we see that the facility address is located here in the city and county of Philadelphia, in the state of Pennsylvania, and the zip code is provided, 19145. The public contact for this plant, at least in 1992, was Shannon Breuer, and his phone number is listed. Please note, the reporting firms are required to answer any questions that you might have about how the form was filled out, but they do not have to indulge any additional questions. Nonetheless, the public contact is a good place to start if you want to move toward a facility tour, to invite the plant manager to speak with your group about toxic use reduction or good neighbor agreements, and so forth. It has been our experience that many of the reporting firms are more than willing to speak with you if you approach them with a positive attitude, perhaps focusing on the major reductions you might have seen over the reporting years in the amount of chemical released to the environment, or something along those lines to open. Rest assured, if you go barging in with requests for more information about the toxic poisons they are dumping on your children or backyard, you might not get much cooperation. Direct action, including sit-ins, pickets, consumer boycotts, or whatever extracurricular activity you might enjoy, have their place, but are not suggested until you hit the brick wall. In the case before us, the firm happens to be one of the better ones we have come across with public relations, no doubt in response to prolonged efforts by the local impacted community to have Sun do the right thing and reduce its emissions. Community pressure intensified since 1992, when the TRI database before us was recorded, as Sun recently acquired the sizable Chevron refinery next door, creating one of the largest refinery complexes in the nation. Let's move on to note that the specific name of the chemical we are looking at here is dichlorodifluoromethane. It happens to be a chlorofluorocarbon and is probably on the TRI list for its ozone-eating properties, though you might not know this yet. Anyway, the maximum amount on site at any one time is between 10,000 and 100,000 pounds. All of the entries in this database are in pounds. The latitude and longitude for the plant are given, next followed by a centroid latitude and a centroid longitude for those large plants that are more than a dot on a map. Such geographic information is important, for we can then locate the facility on a topographic map and see whether it is in a valley subject to thermal inversions, next to major populated areas, by the side of an important drinking supply, and other significant considerations as we consider the potential environmental impact of the facility. Let's scroll further down to the next page using our down arrow key, and we come up with the parent company's name, which is Sun Oil Incorporated, as well as its Dun and Bradstreet number. The Dun and Bradstreet number is important, as we can then track the company at a business library and find out its credit or bond rating, its Superfund liabilities, its assets, and a whole lot of other useful information, which will give us an idea of just how financially able the firm is to install pollution control equipment, switch to alternate production processes generating less waste, and so forth. You should be aware that financial information is much easier to locate for a publicly traded firm such as Sun than it is for a privately held company that does not have to float stock or raise public bond financing. Next, we find out that the chemical here is used as a manufacturing aid, I gather in the production of petroleum products, given that this is a refinery, and that the specific plant has its own Dun and Bradstreet number that you can trace for more specific business information. From here, we move on to a series of EPA ID numbers and then the important National Pollution Discharge Elimination System number, or NPDES number. This is a permit number that's provided under the Clean Water Act for pollution discharge from this plant to a surface waterway. Now, the NPDES permit number here may not apply for this specific chemical. Indeed, it probably does not, as CFCs are usually air and not water releases. Nevertheless, this plant does have a permit for water pollution discharge, and you can use it to trace the actual permit conditions and the water quality monitoring data the plant must provide under the Clean Water Act. RTKNet, the free online data system I referred you to a while back, can provide this information when you log on. Well, as we scroll further down, we come across the Standard Industrial Code number, SIC number. This is 2911, and it indicates that the plant is a petroleum refinery. At last, we get to the actual chemical release data, and you thought we'd never be here. You're still with me, aren't you? Okay, here we find out that a whopping 140,000 pounds of this CFC, dichlorodifluoromethane, were released to the air over Philadelphia in 1992. That comes to 70 tons, right? The sum released to the environment was also 140,000 pounds, indicating that all of this release was air release and there was no water release as suspected. Moreover, the sum release and transfer offsite was 140,000 pounds. Of the air release, 30,000 pounds were non-point air release, meaning that they were fugitive from spills, leaks, materials handling, and so on, while 110,000 pounds were smokestack or point releases. Moreover, the firm arrived at the air non-point range estimate. That's how they estimate how much is lost through non-point sources, here air NE, using a calculation known as estimate. Look at the reporting package, which will be referred to at the end of this video, to see what this means. Basically, the plant has prescribed means whereby its releases are calculated beyond the traditional seat-of-the-pants guess. Many firms are now using mass balance calculations where the total amount of a chemical coming into the plant or manufactured at the plant is compared to the amount leaving in a finished product, with the difference assumed to be lost to the environment. If you see monitored here, you know that the plant actually has monitoring equipment measuring, most likely, point discharge. Here we see that for the point discharge from the plant, it's also labeled as estimate. Beyond this, we find the stream name for water release from the plant, and this happens to be the Schuylkill River. If one were to do a TRI search on the Schuylkill River under the search menu, typing in the river's name and pulling up all the formats for firms that list this river as a repository for wastewater discharge, I gather we'd quickly find out why the good people of Philadelphia would sooner drink beer than local river water. Anyway, we move on to the Q acronyms. They tell us how much of the listed chemical was released in the prior year, here 1991, 150,000 pounds, the current year, 1992, 140,000 pounds, and the percent change for the release for the prior year over the current year, here indicating a decrease from 150,000 pounds to 140,000 pounds, or negative 7%. Now we come to the estimated release for the next year and for future years. Here 30,000 pounds, down from the current 140,000 pounds. This is a major reduction, and one that Sun might point to with pride, though I also suspect it was driven, at least in part, by national legislation and international protocol requiring a phase-out in chlorofluorocarbon use over the coming decade. Finally, we have what's known as a production ratio, or activity ratio. It is a number comparing production for the former year with the current year. The firms use whatever units of production are appropriate for the activity undertaken, such as barrels of gasoline, or TV units, or pounds of sausages, and numbers of burial caskets. Remember the SIC code range we looked at earlier? Here we find that this specific plant had a production ratio of 99% for 1992, indicating that it produced 1% less output in 1992 than in 1991. The production ratio is very important as the first step to uncover wise engineering procedures and toxic use reduction, or at least toxic release reduction efforts. Please note that a firm may report a major reduction in release, and you would not know that this has less to do with process engineering than the simple fact that the product line was discontinued or the plant was downsizing, possibly going out of business or moving to Mexico. Thus, the measure of productive output is very important to separate true waste reduction from mere downsizing. Let's skip back to the previous formula on our list, number 20 out of 21. This is the one listing the second greatest release to the environment. To do this, we simply hit the left arrow key or previous pointing arrow key, which is faster here than going through the action menu. We see that a new form appears. Scrolling with the arrow keys down quickly past the information we already know about the company, we find out that here the chemical of concern happens to be something known as xylene, mixed isomers of xylene. We have a case registration number here, a chemical abstracts service registration number, which is specific to this type of mixture. Furthermore, we find out that a maximum of 10 million to 50 million pounds of this chemical were on site at any one point over the reporting year. That's quite a load. For substance manufacturing use, we see that xylene is both produced and imported at the facility, and that it is used for processing. When we move down to the product use, we learn that the chemical is used as a component in the formulation of other refinery products. Here we find out that there were 15,400 pounds of xylene released at this site into the air in 1992, and just 15 pounds released to the land. Moreover, the sum environmental release, that is air and land, here came to 15,415 pounds. Furthermore, 680 pounds were sent off-site through transfers, and that the same amount appears on the some off-site and publicly owned treatment works transfer line. Finally, the total release to the environment and off-site transfer came to 16,095 pounds. Back to the air release. Of the 15,400 pounds, 14,000 pounds came from non-point or fugitive release, and the remainder, 1,400 pounds, came from point smokestack release. For the small 15 pounds of land release, we find that the receiving site applied what is euphemistically called land treatment to the waste. Moreover, the land treatment involved what appears to be farmland. More information on this process may be had from disc number 2 in the CD-ROM set, the waste treatment disc, and I encourage you to check out the use of the toxic chemical waste, here hydrocarbons, as farm fertilizer. The 680 pounds sent off-site ended up at the Petroleum Recycling Company in Clayton, New Jersey, where the waste was solidified and stabilized. As we move past the Q, or quantity release abbreviations already covered for the previous chemical, we find the O listings here detailing on-site and off-site treatment for xylene for the prior year, the current year, and for next year, projected for next year. Well, I think you get the hang of the release database. Let's just skim one more form for a quick review by scrolling back to the 19th record, the one preceding number 20 we just looked at. Here we see that it is for toluene, and that again, between 10 million and 50 million pounds are on site, with 14,300 pounds released to the air in 1992, and 810 pounds sent off-site for land treatment through farming. Okay, now that we know that CFCs, xylenes, and toluene are released to the environment at this plant site, what does it mean in terms of human and environmental health? Well, fortunately, the EPA CD-ROM discs before us also contain very useful information on the health, safety, and ecological impact of most, but not all, of the TRI chemicals in the reporting list. To access this information, we quit the release data by hitting the F10 key and responding with yes, you bet, when the program asks us if we really want to quit. Next, we return to the main menu screen, and when highlighted, choose Chemical Substance Fact Sheets by hitting the Enter key. We hit Enter again, and we come to a menu asking us whether we wish to search the table of contents for all of the listed chemicals, to enter the common name of the chemical we're interested in, or to search by its chemical abstract's service number. We'll choose common name here and type in xylenes with a question mark. Because we do the question mark once again as we're not sure of the exact name of the mixture we looked at. When we hit enter, we come up next with a series of screens. We next come up with a series of screens containing 486 lines of information on xylenes, probably more than you ever thought you wanted to know. The data accumulated here comes from May 1989 and is a bit dated, but will serve our purposes for now. Well, just scrolling quickly through the information provided, we notice that xylenes can affect you when breathed in and by passing through your skin. They may also damage the developing fetus. They can irritate the eyes, nose, and throat, and high levels can cause dizziness, passing out, and death. The chemical mixture has been linked to bone marrow damage, low blood cell count, and memory loss. Moreover, xylenes are flammable liquids and fire hazards. Further down, we find out about the properties and uses of xylenes, such as with insecticide and gasoline production. as well as the reasons why the chemical are cited on the TRI database in the first place. Recalling how important it is to work with the unions and labor interests as we advocate jobs with environmental justice, we have next a wealth of information we can share with workers on exposure testing, workplace exposure, limits and ways to reduce exposure, and so forth. Moving further down the list, we find out that xylenes have not, as of 1989, been tested as a cancer hazard, and such cannot be ruled out. Moreover, the chemicals may damage the developing fetus as well as the liver and kidneys of the exposed individual. There is no time to consider here the wealth of information further down on the medical testing, workplace control practices, handling and storage recommendations, first aid information, and the ecological impact of xylenes. Suffice to say, while this chemical release information is drawn from government agency testing and industry's own advisory councils, and thus may be a little bit too conservative for some, it stands out as a useful first base from which to move on as we investigate the health and environmental impact of the TRI chemicals released into our communities. Well, it's time to wrap it up and get you out from behind the TV screen to your local depository library to start digging up the dirt. Once again, we hit F10 to quit the program, then choose Quit CD-ROM Disk from the menu. We reach around, turn off our computer, or just leave it blinking for the next patron. As detailed and confusing as this video may appear to you, please be aware that I've only covered the basic features of the toxic release inventory and how to access it in CD-ROM format. When demonstrating the database before a live audience, we usually have a community volunteer come up who has never touched a computer before in their life. As you can anticipate, committed community activists learn very quickly, and within an hour or so, our volunteer is merrily hacking away, downloading all sorts of juicy information about the company that previously may have stonewalled her. In conclusion, the Environmental Studies program at Dickinson College is committed to science by the people and not just for the people. We believe that community outreach groups, such as our own, should not do for the public what the public can be empowered to do for itself. This forms the very basis for a strong commitment to getting the word out about the toxic release inventory and how to access it to as many people as possible. Remember, Congress, when passing the Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act, specifically intended that you have information about the hazardous substances that are stored and released in your community. You have a right, actually you have an obligation to access this database if you are truly concerned about the environmental health of your family and your neighborhood. As envisioned through EPCRA, knowledge can lead to power and even further democracy, where democracy entails taking control of the forces affecting one's life. These include some control over the many environmental risks which we are asked to accept as the price of progress. Dickinson College is committed to assisting with this effort, and we welcome further inquiry. I want to thank you for staying with me during this long introduction to the toxic release inventory and how to access it. Please stay tuned for further information on how to get a hold of the many manuals that I referred to in the video and how to access the phone numbers that we covered.
you.